The last thing Nadia Osei expected on a Tuesday morning was to be standing in front of a classroom of 32 high schoolers when the door swung open and a boy walked in 12 minutes late, wearing a leather jacket that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and dropped his bag on the floor like the sound of it hitting linoleum was a personal announcement. She didn't look up from the board right away. She finished writing the date, September 14th, and the day's objective, analyze how an author's word choice shapes tone. Then she turned around. "You're late," she said. He didn't apologize. He found a seat near the back, slouched into it, and pulled out his phone. Nadia was 26 years old. She had a master's degree in English literature from Northwestern, a student loan debt she didn't like to think about, and a stubborn belief that every student deserved to be treated the same, regardless of who their family was. She'd been teaching at Lakeview Prep for 6 weeks. 6 weeks was long enough to learn which kids had tutors, which had trust funds, and which had both. She walked to the back of the room and stood beside his desk. "Phone away," she said. He looked up at her with the particular bored expression of someone who had never been told no and found the concept theoretically amusing. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "You're a student in my 3rd period English class," she said, "which means right now you're a student who's late and on his phone. Phone away, please." His name was Bastian Morrow. She knew that already. She'd looked at her roster. But she hadn't connected the name until that moment, hadn't placed it against the whispered conversations she'd caught in the teacher's lounge, the way certain staff members would talk about the Morrow family in a voice slightly lower than normal, as if the walls had ears. As if Lakeview itself had ears. Bastian Morrow's father, she'd been told, was the kind of man who didn't send strongly worded letters when he had a problem with something. He sent other things instead. Bastian put the phone away with the slow deliberateness of someone doing her an enormous favor. She went back to the front of the room and taught the class. 3 weeks later, she handed back the unit essay. She'd graded all of them over the weekend at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold twice and a red pen she'd had since graduate school. She was careful. She always was. She left comments, not just corrections. She believed in that. Bastian's essay was 2 pages. The prompt had asked for 4. He'd written about the assigned text. Hemingway's hills like white elephants, in broad, sweeping sentences that said almost nothing while appearing to say something. The kind of writing that looked like effort from a distance and revealed itself as hollow the moment you read it slowly. She gave him a 53. An F. She wrote at the bottom, "You clearly have an instinct for language. This draft doesn't use it. Rewrite available. See me." He looked at the grade for a long time when she handed it back. Then he folded the paper once and put it in his jacket pocket without a word. She thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The call came on a Wednesday evening while she was making pasta. She didn't recognize the number. She almost didn't answer. But some trained reflex from years of being a person who answered calls she didn't recognize, made her pick up. "Miss Osei." The voice on the other end was smooth and professionally neutral in the way that some voices were when they'd been trained to be. "My employer would like to speak with you at your earliest convenience." "Who is your employer?" she asked, a brief pause. "Mr. Morrow." She set down the wooden spoon. "Mr. Morrow is welcome to request a parent-teacher conference through the school's main office," she said. "I'm available Thursday afternoons between 2 and 4, another pause. Longer, this time. "Mr. Morrow prefers to meet at a time and location of his choosing. A car will be sent tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. She opened her mouth to say that wasn't how this worked, that parents didn't send cars, that she wasn't getting into a car sent by a man she'd never met because his son failed an English essay. But the line had already gone quiet. He'd disconnected before she could respond. She told herself she wasn't going to go. She called her sister in Atlanta and told her the whole story. Her sister told her she was definitely not going. Her sister also told her she would probably go anyway because she'd never in her life backed down from a situation where she believed she was right, and failing to show up would feel like backing down. Her sister knew her too well. The car arrived at 7. It was black, obviously. A town car with tinted windows, idling in front of her apartment building with the patience of something that had nowhere else to be and knew it. The driver didn't speak during the ride. She watched Chicago move past the windows, the lake on one side, the city lights fractaling off the water, and kept her hands folded in her lap, and her breathing even. She was not afraid, she told herself. She was a teacher going to a meeting. The house was in Lincoln Park. It wasn't a house, actually. It was the kind of building that had once been an industrial space and had been converted into something that looked like architecture and felt like a statement. All dark steel and glass, warm light bleeding through floor-to-ceiling windows onto a private courtyard. She was met at the door by a woman around 40, dressed in charcoal grey, who introduced herself as no one and led Nadia through rooms that smelled like wood smoke and old money, into a study lined with books she suspected were actually read. Reginald Morrow was standing at the window. She'd expected someone loud, someone who filled a room with presence the way Bastian filled a classroom, aggressively, deliberately. But Reginald Morrow was the opposite. He was around 50, silver at the temples, and possessed the particular stillness of a man who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone and had stopped trying years ago. He turned when she entered. "Mrs. Osei," he said, "thank you for coming. I'm not sure I had a choice," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Everyone has a choice. "Sit down." She sat. He sat across from her in a chair that faced hers the way a chess piece faces another chess piece, not aggressive but deliberate. "My son failed your class," he said. "Your son failed an essay in my class," she said. "That's a recoverable situation. I offered a rewrite." He mentioned that. Reginald looked at her with the flat, unreadable attention of someone who spent most of his professional life reading people and had gotten very good at it. "He's also mentioned that you didn't hesitate. I grade essays based on the work, Mr. Morrow, not the student's last name." He was quiet for a moment. "The last 3 teachers who graded Bastian's work," he said, "gave him a B or better on everything." She felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, closer to anger, actually. Then they weren't doing him any favors. Reginald tilted his head slightly. "No," he said slowly. "They weren't." She hadn't expected that. She'd walked into this room prepared for threats, however politely worded, prepared for the particular pressure of someone wealthy reminding her, without ever saying it directly, that there were consequences to inconveniencing people like him. She'd prepared a response for that. Several, actually. She hadn't prepared for him to agree with her. "My son," Reginald said, "has spent the last 4 years being told he's exceptional when the evidence does not support that conclusion. I've been made aware of this. I've been unable to address it through conventional means because the people around him have a financial incentive to keep him comfortable." He paused. "You are the first teacher in 4 years who has told him the truth." Nadia looked at him carefully. "You brought me here at 7 in the evening in a car I didn't request to thank me for failing your son." "No." He leaned forward slightly. "I brought you here because I want you to tutor him." She blinked. "I want someone who isn't intimidated by him or by me to sit across from him twice a week and teach him how to write something worth reading," Reginald said. "The school won't do it adequately. The school has interests that conflict with honesty. You apparently do not." She should have said no, the professional part of her brain, the part that had read every article about maintaining appropriate boundaries, was already constructing a polite, firm refusal. "I charge $60 an hour, she said instead. Something in Reginald Morrow's face shifted then. Not a smile exactly, something warmer than that and more surprised. "Done," he said. Bastian was a different problem entirely. He showed up to the first session at the dining room table of the Morrow house. She refused to come back to the Lincoln Park building, insisted on a neutral location, and they'd compromised on a townhouse in Wicker Park that turned out to be one of 4 properties Reginald owned, and he sat across from her with his arms crossed and the look of someone who had been told to eat their vegetables and intended to do it as slowly as possible. "I don't need a tutor," he said. "I know you think that," Nadia said. She put his essay on the table between them. Tell me what this sentence is trying to say." She pointed to a line in the second paragraph. He looked at it. "It's saying the author uses the setting to create mood," he said. "That's what it's trying to say," she agreed. "What is it actually saying?" He read it again. She watched something shift behind his eyes. Not embarrassment exactly, but its precursor. The moment before a person realizes they've been sloppy and decides whether to be defensive or honest about it. "It's vague," he said finally. "It's very vague," she said. "You can write better than this. I can tell because there are 3 sentences in here that aren't vague at all." She pointed to them. This is what you sound like when you're not performing." He looked at the sentences. "Those are the ones I wrote at the end. I ran out of time." "I know," she said. "Write like you're running out of time." It took 3 sessions before he stopped crossing his arms. 4 before he started actually asking questions instead of just answering them. By the 6th session, he'd rewritten the essay. Not the original draft, something new, something that opened with a line sharp enough to make her set down her coffee, and she'd read it twice before she said anything. "This is good," she told him. He was quiet for a second, like he was waiting for the conditional clause. The but. It didn't come. "Okay," he said, and looked at the table, and she understood that this was what it looked like when Bastian Morrow didn't know what to do with a compliment that wasn't being used to get something from him. She started seeing Reginald at the townhouse. Not every session. Usually he was gone before she arrived, and on the occasions their schedules overlapped it was brief. He'd pour her a coffee, without asking, put it on the kitchen counter, and say something about the weather, or ask about the session with the exact measured interest of someone who was practicing being interested, rather than performing it. But she started to notice things. The way he read while she tutored, in the chair in the next room that was just angled enough to be visible through the doorway, the way he set the copy of whatever he was reading face down when he looked up, a habit she recognized from people who were self-conscious about being caught paying attention. The way he'd asked her once what she thought of the Hemingway story. She'd told him the truth, that she found it more technically interesting than emotionally satisfying, that Hemingway's restraint often felt like withholding, that she was more moved by writers who trusted the reader with feeling rather than making the reader hunt for it. He'd looked at her like she'd said something that surprised him into thinking. "I've been told all my life to prefer Hemingway," he said, "by people who wanted you to think that restraint was the same thing as strength," she said. He'd been quiet for a long time after that. The trouble arrived on a Friday. She was leaving the townhouse at 8:30 when she found 2 men she didn't recognize standing near the front door. Not Reginald's usual staff. Harder than his staff, with the particular posture of people whose job description was primarily physical. Reginald appeared behind her in the hallway. "Go back inside," he said, not to her, to them. The taller of the 2 men looked at Nadia with an expression she didn't like and didn't quite understand, and then they left. She looked at Reginald. "I'm going to need you to tell me what that was," she said. He didn't insult her by pretending it was nothing. He ran a hand along the back of his neck, which she'd noticed he did when he was deciding how much to say. "There is a man named Carver," he said. "He and I have had a disagreement about a business matter. He is making that disagreement inconvenient." "Inconvenient," she repeated. "He sent those men to remind me that he's paying attention." Reginald looked at her directly. "You should know that. I should have told you earlier." She felt something complicated run through her. Not quite fear, not quite anger, something that had both in it. "How long has this been happening?" 3 weeks. I've been coming here for 3 weeks. "Yes." She took a breath. Held it. His question surprised him. She could see it. And something about his surprise told her more than he probably intended. That it wasn't the question he'd expected. That it was the question that mattered. "Yes," he said. "Bastian is safe. I have made certain of it. And the tutoring." He looked at her. "That's your decision." She thought about it for exactly 5 seconds, long enough to know that the right answer wasn't the careful answer, wasn't the self-protective answer. long enough to remember that she'd taken this on because she believed Bastian could be more than what he'd been allowed to be, and she wasn't willing to walk away from that because someone she'd never met was playing power games. "Tuesday at 4, she said. "I'll be here." The situation with Carver accelerated the following week. She was teaching period 6 when the school's administrative assistant knocked on her classroom door and told her, in the strained tone of someone who had been asked to deliver a message they found personally distressing, that she had a phone call in the main office. She excused herself. The voice on the other end wasn't smooth this time. It was flat and deliberate in a different way, the way of someone making a point. "You should reconsider your Tuesday evenings, Miss Osei," the man said. "Some associations carry costs that aren't immediately visible." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't know who you are, and I don't take scheduling advice from anonymous callers. If you want to discuss something with me, use your name." The line went dead. She stood in the main office for a moment, looking at the phone receiver in her hand. Then she put it down, went back to her classroom, and finished teaching period 6. She called Reginald from her car at 3:45. "Someone called the school," she said. "A man who didn't give his name. He told me to reconsider my Tuesday evenings." The silence on his end had a particular quality to it. "Don't come Tuesday," he said. "I'm coming Tuesday," she said. Nadia. It was the first time he'd used her first name. She noticed it. She suspected he noticed that she noticed. "I don't take scheduling advice from people who won't give me their names," she said. "That includes people calling on someone else's behalf." Another silence. Longer. "There are things about my life," Reginald said carefully, "that I haven't explained to you. I know. And you're still coming Tuesday. I'm still coming Tuesday." She could hear him breathe. Then, very quietly, he said, "Okay." Tuesday arrived with a cold front, pushing in off the lake, and a sky the color of old concrete. She drove herself. She'd insisted on that from the beginning. She'd take the car on Reginald's schedule, never hers. And she pulled up to the Wicker Park townhouse at 3:55 and sat in her car for a moment with the engine running, watching the street. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. She just looked. The session with Bastian was the best they'd had. He'd brought in a new piece, not an assignment, something he'd written on his own, late on a Saturday night based on the timestamp he'd accidentally left at the top of the document, and it was rough and real, and had a voice in it she hadn't heard from him before. A voice that wasn't performing, she told him. He looked at the table again, but this time, she noticed, the corner of his mouth was doing something. When Bastian left at 6, she was gathering her things in the kitchen when Reginald came in from the back of the house. He was moving differently than usual, faster, tighter. "Carver is here," he said. She turned around. "Not in the house," he said. "On the street, with 3 men." He looked at her. "I need you to go out the back." She looked at him for a moment. "Are you going out the front?" "Yes, alone. I have people with me. Reginald." He stopped. She'd never said his name before. She'd only ever called him Mr. Morrow, had maintained that small distance on purpose, and she watched him register the difference. "Don't go out the front alone," she said. He looked at her with something in his face that she couldn't fully read, something that had its own weight, its own complicated history, something that had been closed for a long time and was thinking about the cost of remaining closed. "Go out the back," he said quietly. "Please," she went. She was halfway down the alley when she heard the shouting. Then silence, then the sound of a car peeling out of the front of the block. She stopped walking, stood in the alley in the cold, her bag over her shoulder, and counted 60 seconds. Then she went back. Reginald was in the kitchen when she came through the back door. He was standing at the sink with his hands on the counter and his head down. And when she came in, he turned and looked at her with the expression of a man who had been bracing for something and found a different thing instead. "You came back," he said. "I wanted to make sure you were still standing," she said. He was. There was a cut above his left eyebrow, shallow, already half-clotted, and his jacket was ruined, but he was standing. She found the first aid kit under the sink, the way she always found things she needed in unfamiliar kitchens, by just opening cabinets, until something made sense. She put it on the counter. "Sit down," she said. He sat at the kitchen table without argument, which surprised her. She pulled a chair across from him and opened the kit. "Carver won't be back," Reginald said. "Good." She found the antiseptic wipes. "Why not? Because I gave him something he wanted more than he wanted to intimidate me. A concession on a port contract." He watched her open the wipe. "I should have done it 3 months ago. I was stubborn." "People who are used to not conceding often are," she said. She cleaned the cut. He didn't flinch, but she noticed the set of his jaw, the deliberate stillness. "You stayed," he said, "after the call, after everything. You kept coming." She peeled the backing off an adhesive strip. Bastian was finally starting to write like he meant it. "I wasn't walking away from that." "It wasn't only Bastian," he said. She looked up. He was watching her with the particular attention she'd noticed from the beginning, the attention of someone who measured everything carefully and was, for the first time she could remember, not measuring. "No," she said after a moment. "It wasn't only Bastian." She pressed the strip over the cut. Her fingers stayed against his temple a beat longer than necessary. He didn't move. Outside, the wind was coming off the lake in long, cold sheets, rattling the kitchen window. The light in the room was warm and low. Somewhere in the front of the house, the heating system ticked on. "I owe you more than a tutor's rate," he said quietly. "You owe me the rest of the semester," she said. "Bastian still needs 3 more essays before he'll really have it." Reginald looked at her. Something in his face was very still and very open at the same time. "Stay for dinner," he said. It wasn't a request. It also wasn't the kind of summons she'd gotten 6 weeks ago. The smooth voice on the phone, the town car she hadn't ordered, the house she hadn't chosen to go to. This was different. She could hear the difference. She put the first aid kit back together and set it on the counter. "I'm not great at small talk," she warned him. "Neither am I." He stood up. "I'll make something. You cook, I've been told I'm adequate," he said. And this time, finally, the corner of his mouth went somewhere she'd been watching it, try to go for 6 weeks. She sat down at the kitchen table and thought about how strange it was, how unreasonable, how completely unplanned that this was where she'd ended up, across from a man she'd been afraid to meet, in a house she'd come to because of a failing grade on an essay about Hemingway, watching him pull vegetables from a refrigerator like a person who had learned to make dinner for himself somewhere along the way and never stopped. Bastian had gotten the rewrite right because she'd told him to stop performing and start being honest, she thought. Maybe she needed to take her own advice. "The Hemingway thing," she said. "I meant it. The writers I love most are the ones who trust that feelings are worth saying." Reginald was cutting an onion. He looked up briefly. "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about it." And he was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city moved through its ordinary evening, indifferent to the particular warmth of this particular kitchen. "I think," he said carefully, "that I've spent a long time confusing restraint for something more respectable than it is." She looked at him. "So have I," she said. The knife kept moving on the cutting board, the heating system ticked, the wind came off the lake in long, cold sweeps and found no way in.